Hello viewers, welcome back to Story Icon PK with a new story. Once upon a time there lived a king and queen who had a little baby daughter. They asked all the fairies in the kingdom to a feast, but unfortunately forgot to invite one of them because it happened that unfortunately there were 13 fairies and the king had only 12 gold plates for the feast. So he was obliged to pretend he had forgotten the 13th fairy. The 12 fairies came to the feast and they each brought a magic gift to infant princess. One gave her beauty, another health and happiness, another cleverness, another sweet temper, and a kind heart, and so on, until it came to the 12th fairy. But before she could speak, the door flew open, and in there swept the 13th fairy who had not been invited. She had an ugly frown on her face and looked so angry that everyone drew back to let her pass. Straight up to the baby she went, and she looked closely at the little beautiful face.
You shall have my gift, though I was not invited, she said with a spiteful smile. When you are 15 years old, you shall prick your finger with the spindle and fall down dead. Then she cast an evil look all around and flew out of the window. Everyone stood quite silent with grief and horror until the 12th fairy stepped forward and waved her wand. I have still a gift to bestow, she said, and thought I may not change the wicked fairy's prophecy, I can at least make it less evil. The princess shall not die when she pricks her finger with the spindle, but she shall fall into a deep sleep, which will last 100 years. Then all the fairies left the palace, and the king and queen began to think that perhaps the wicked fairy had been only a bad dream. But in case any harm should really come to the little princess, Briar Rose, it was ordered that every spinning wheel in the kingdom should be destroyed, and very soon not a spindle was to be found throughout all the length and breadth of the land.
Now, the fairy gifts which had been given to the princess were seen more and more clearly but mortal eyes as she grew older. She was as beautiful as a flower, and as clever as she was good, and as happy as the day was long. The king and queen thought no more of the evil prophecy, and so the years slipped by until Briar Rose was 15. It happened that on her 15th birthday, the king and queen went out together, and the princess was left all alone in the palace and began to feel very dull. So she thought she would go through all the rooms in the palace and look for adventures. After a while, she came to a little turret stair which she never remembered having seen before. And when she climbed to the top, she came to a curious little door. The princess knocked, and an old cracked voice cried out, "Come in." And when the princess opened the door, she saw a little old woman sitting there with the spinning wheel. "Oh, what a funny thing that is," said the princess, looking at the spinning wheel, for she had never seen such a thing before. "How I should love to make it go whirling round and round." And she put out her hand to touch it, but the spindle pricked her finger and a tiny drop of blood sprang out. Before she had even time to cry out, part of the fairy's evil prophecy came true, for she sank down on the stone bench and fell fast asleep. At that very moment, everybody and everything in the palace stopped what they were doing and fell fast asleep too. The king and queen sank down in two royal chairs, the cook in the kitchen, who was just going to box the ears, went fast asleep with her hand still in the ear, open, ready to roar with the pain, left it open and went fast asleep too. The horses in the stable went to sleep in the middle of eating their corn. The pigeons on the stable roof had not even time to tuck their heads under their wings, but fell asleep as they were strutting around with their tails still spread out. The flies slept on the ceiling, and Canary did not want to have the green cover put over its cage, but slept in broad daylight. The fire stopped crackling and burning. The pots stopped boiling. Nothing stirred. Nothing moved. Not a sound was heard. Only round the palace there sprung up a hedge of princes, which grew taller and taller as time went on until the palace was quite hidden and not even the top of the flagstaff could be seen. And as the years went by, people began to forget about the palace. Only the old people would tell the children sometime about the beautiful princess who once lived in a palace where the princess grew. But the children thought it was a make believe story, for the hedge was so thick and so high that no one could see what was inside. Sometimes a prince would come riding by and listen to the tale, and then try and cut his way through the thick hedge to see if there was really a beautiful princess on the other side. But the thorns tore everyone who tried to force his way through, and sometimes put out his eyes. So the princess grew tired of trying, and each year the hedge grew taller and thicker. Now it happened that on the very day when the princess had been asleep for 100 years, there chanced to come to that country a prince who was braver and handsome than any of other prince who had come before. He had never known what it meant to be beaten or to give in, and when he heard the story of the princess, he made up his mind to find her. But when he got to the target hedge, but when he got to the great hedge, he found it covered with pale pink roses, and the branches parted in front of him to make a passage, and all the thorns looked the other way. On the walked through the cool green path while the roses nodded and smiled on him all the way. And when he came to the other side, he saw a stately palace, just as the old people had described it. Not a sound broke the solemn stillness. Not a leaf whispered in the breeze. Then, when he entered the great hall, he saw the king and queen fast asleep on their royal chairs, and everything and everybody was exactly the same as when they had fallen asleep 100 years ago. Presently, the prince noticed the turret steps that led to the tower, and he climbed them just as the princess had done. And when he opened the door and stepped in, he stood still in wonder and delight. The princess lay there fast asleep, her fair face turned towards him, just as she had sunk down to rest 100 years ago. Everything was unchanged, except that now around the bed was a canopy of princess protecting her as she slept. The flower breathed their beauty around her, and the sharp thorn guarded her from all harm. So beautiful did the princess look lying there, like a pale rose herself, that the prince was drawn to her side, and bending over her, he kissed her cheek. The princess' eyelids quivered, and the next moment her eyes opened. She looked up and saw the prince bending over her, and when their eyes met, she gave a little cry of joy. "Oh," she cried, "you have come at last! I have been dreaming and dreaming of you, and I thought you were never coming to wake me." Now, the moment the princess opened her eyes, everyone and everything in the palace began to awake too. The king and queen walked with stately tread through the hill. The cook gave the scullion a sounding box on his ear. The scullion rode with his mouth wide open. The horses went on eating their corn. The pigeons strutted about on the roof. The flies walked busily up and down the ceiling. And the great hedge of princess sank down till it vanished in the earth. And not even a bird was left. "But what does it matter if the roses are gone?" said the prince, "since I have got my own. prince, my own rose, who is fairest of them all. And so they were married and lived happily ever after.